Welcome back, finally, to the Chainsaw Man Comparison Series. Now on the very last episode, which covers the rest of Chapter 35, Chapter 36, Chapter 37, and the vast majority of Chapter 38. This episode is the most jam-packed episode as of yet, and it wastes no time in picking up right where we left off, right after we get some new cuts of the death grip that the Ghost Devil has on Aki. Once Aki comes close to passing out, we can resume our manga coverage on page 6 of Chapter 35, where Aki revisits a flashback we had way back on Chapter 16. But as it turns out, we didn't quite get the full story back then, because now we know that Himeno took the cigarette back from Aki once she realized his age. However, this entire flashback, including the bit that we already knew, is now told entirely from the first-person perspective of Aki. The manga keeps that perspective for a total of 13 back-to-back panels, showing that this event really must have stuck with him. Even when he's getting choked out, it's one of the first things that comes to his mind for some reason. I'm sure Himeno would be happy to know that, and well, maybe she does, because it almost seems like she stopped the Ghost Devil from choking Aki out. Himeno left behind quite the life-saving cigarette, a statement that in and of itself is pretty ironic, but I think it's more impressive just how far ahead Himeno thought. Just like the time she revved Denji's engine before she passed, she utilized her Ghost Devil to the maximum, and even had time to write a message on what I assume is the same cigarette she confiscated from Aki a long way back. Well, regardless, now Aki can calmly approach the Ghost Devil to kill it, something that houses a large chunk of this chapter with only a couple of minor changes here and there. Like how Aki starts his little monologue before he walks under the ghost arms this time, or how his flashback of Himeno now has seizure-inducing flashbacks within those flashbacks. Don't worry, within these flickers there's no Easter eggs to be found, it's just used as a build-up for Aki to finally decapitate the Ghost Devil once and for all. Now, we'll be talking a lot about this later on, but the synergy between 2D and 3D work is the telltale feature of this episode, and this moment is a great example. True enough, a lot of it is done to save time. After all, drawing every single flower petal on this thing frame by frame would be a monotonous endeavor, but I really think MAPPA covers their tracks well. Heck, I bet some of you didn't realize that there's 2 layers of blue jelly coming out of this devil. One that's drawn over the CGI model to hide the extrusion, and another more fluid CGI layer that updates every frame. Higher frame times with CGI as opposed to choppy ones in 2D is the crux of the balancing act for MAPPA, and for the most part, MAPPA nails that balance. Even with respect to time-oriented concerns, the approach to these techniques acts less as a crutch and more of a tool. But again, we'll get more into that later. For now, let's move on to the opening. And now that that's over, we'll continue with the rest of this chapter, where Aki saves Sawatari from the wild knife-wielding Kobeni that spawned behind her. It's amazing, for someone who genuinely hates this job, she always seems to pull up when it matters. She wants to get that sweet payday after all. I really do hope Kobeni gets a nice bonus for her next check, but for now we'll move away from this scene and chapter and move over to Denji and Power on the next chapter, who are on their way up to the next level of carnage. Looks like Power brought along a souvenir from their last stop. Well, it's more of an afternoon snack than anything else. Not really sure if that counts as cannibalism considering what Power is, but one thing's for sure, she's gonna find a lot more of it on the floor they just arrived on. Now, the more sagacious play here would be to simply back away quietly, but after the ridicule of being a coward Denji put her through back in the hospital, she feels like she's got something to prove here. Not that he cares or wants any part of this redemption story. It's amazing how fearless she can be when, well, she has nothing to fear. This part was done by Benjamin Floir, someone who's been a very prominent figure in this series, and his layout this time is especially interesting considering how much it changed after directorial checks, most of which comes down to the character expressions. The proportions of Power and Denji were eventually made to more closely match that of Kazutaka Tsugiyama's character designs, as well as some timing readjustments here and there, but for the meat of the action itself, that mostly holds firm. Which is exactly why this part is gonna be kinda hard to show on YouTube, lest I get demonetized for the 4th time this series. So that part will have to be left for the uncensored version. Link in the description. While Power does her thing, we'll continue along with the tired Denji, and just like the scenes before Power's Slaughterfest, the expressions here have been redone drastically to more closely match Denji's characteristics. It's almost like he could sense that Mr. Sideburns man was graciously waiting for him on the exact floor he got off at, a floor that the anime alone clarified was the 13th floor. Really, this guy's obsession with Denji is more juvenile than Denji himself, considering he thinks that he has the moral high ground of all people. He's well aware that his granddad killed mad people, and yet somehow Denji putting him down after he tried to kill him wasn't justified? Doesn't really add up to me. But Denji of all people isn't one to get into a pissing match about ethics. No, he's more of a tooth and nail sort of guy, which is good for all the Sakuga fanatics out there because from this point forward, we get the fight that everyone's been waiting for. Chainsaw Man versus Katana Man. And boy does this fight have a lot of changes. Most of them are additive, but some of them were left out in the anime, like how we no longer actually get to see them transform or get Denji's initial reaction to the Katana Man's game-breaking move that he's so proud of. This moment was actually emphasized pretty heavily in the manga, especially considering Denji blocking this attack for the first time is a 2-page illustration in itself. There's a reason why Sideburns Man was so shocked to see Denji in one piece when the two of them exited the building. It seems like Denji's training is already paying off, and that revelation is a perfect closer for chapter 36, as well as a perfect opener for the halfway point commercial break. Once the show comes back from that break, we can continue with the fight on the next chapter. Just kidding, we're not there yet. Instead, we're gonna get some anime-exclusive fight scenes to break down, starting with Denji getting kicked into a nearby roof. The roof section of this fight is laid out mostly by Michael Sung, and boy oh boy has this section gone through a transformation. And playing a hand at that transformation came from key animators Chris and Tatsuya Yoshihara, who expanded upon Sung's vision accordingly. And if that second name sounds familiar, it's because it's the action director himself who's doing some of the key animation for this fight. And not only that, but he and Chris are backed up by some of the total of 23 separate animation directors in charge of this episode. And just for reference, episode 1 had 5 animation directors, so I think it's safe to say that this layout went through more of MAPPA's staff than any other fight thus far, and what we're left with is a sequence that closely matches the rigorous quick cut style that primary director Ryu Nakayama sought out in his rendition of this IP, who, as it turns out, is also getting his hands dirty as the episode director for the finale of season 1. With all this talent floating around then, it's no surprise that the choreography in this final fight is perfectly tuned to reflect the characters themselves. Denji looks pretty loose in these engagements, showing a lot of confidence, but also showing that he's still getting pushed back. He hasn't completely bridged the power gap yet. Michael Sung's next cut in this layout here makes that plain enough to see, but actually this cut is one cut that I couldn't find a tangible match for in the final product. Instead, it seems that in place of this cut, it was redone with a barrage of quick cuts which were mostly done by Chris. I imagine he did get inspiration from this layout, but inevitably what he and his peers went with was a far more zoomed in perspective by bringing Denji and the Katana Man in and out of the frame right to left before moving into the next cut. This successfully incorporates Nakayama's style while properly conveying that Denji is still a tad outclassed in these exchanges. But with that being said, I like how when we start to more closely follow Sung's layout again, the quick cut style starts to slow down a bit as we follow Denji's transition onto the next rooftop. Slowing down the pace every so often without breaking the speed of the characters themselves is great action direction, and it gives the audience some time to breathe a little bit. Counting the first far out perspective from Sung's layout that was removed, the second one that this one adapts has a much more unrelenting style of movement. It dictates that the Katana Man literally will not give Denji any time to rest, even if our eyes get to for a bit before moving back up close and personal. Might I say that Tatsuya Yoshihara really lives up to his name as an action director. The key animation he provided here brought Sung's layout to new heights by adding a lot more flail to their movements. These two are really at the mercy of their own masses, but just like their personalities, they are ever pressing and throwing the next strike regardless of how heavy the recoil is. So yes, the movement is incredible, but I also gotta give props to the effect work here. Simple overlay work would have done just fine, but these sparks support the scene insanely well. They fly and bounce around the scene with such fluidity. It makes everything so much more incredibly dynamic when paired with those reared-in camera angles. You can really feel the power being exerted here, not just from the kick that nearly sent Denji off the rooftop, but the follow-up kick that did send him off the rooftop. Now, as you just saw, a 3D model was used even in the layout for this movement, and considering how the rest of this fight will play out, let's address that real quick. The second part of this fight is located on a train, and unlike Michael Sung's layout, this requires a lot of additional moving parts, meaning that naturally CGI was the most plausible end result for this scene. But that doesn't keep MAPPA from shying away from the details of this event. No, instead Nakayama-san went so far as to extend this moment on the roof of the train with some anime-exclusive dialogue. You know, instead of Denji just getting immediately plunged into the cabin as soon as he made it there like in the manga. This new dialogue mainly comes down to them discussing Denji's motivations and the like, and while it is the most blatantly obvious use of CGI, I think we would do better to look at this less from a 2D Sakuga file perspective and more as just an appreciator of good animation in general. Now, some of you might cringe at what I just said, but the fact of the matter is that it takes a lot of technical know-how and experimentation to get things like this done right. Replicating the 2D aesthetic in 3D space has come a long way. Ever since the mid-2010s, shading generation and general workflow has taken a massive leap. And it kinda needs to, because CGI by its purest foundations is a medium that isn't very compatible with its more line-centric 2D brethren, but man has the methodology adapted to fit its criteria, and sometimes even improve it. For example, when anime characters have the wind blowing against them, usually animation cycles reset every 3 new pictures or so, a process that was recreated here in 3D space, but what's really interesting about it is that all of those separate states can act independent of one another and trigger while still being linked to the 3D rig. What this means is that we can get additional movements while those animation states are recycling. This opens the door to a ton of easily adjustable pose work, and it works well for the animators who try to get as intricate with its movement as this show does. Putting aside some of the whiplash you might feel when switching over the medium threshold, MAPPA's 3D team has done a phenomenal job at adapting that gentler style of movement, and personally, I love how the mannerisms of the characters match up with the voice work. While the slower movement does make it easier to discern that it's computer generated, when it's in full swing, that's a bit of a different story. This is when the benefits of 3D work shine the most, because camera work like this has never looked so clean. Mix that in with some incredible 2D-esque effects such as smear frames, impact frames, and some touch-up work, and you've got the best of all worlds. I will say though that there are some seams of inconsistency for the overall picture if you look closely enough. Mainly compositional errors like how characters align with the rapidly evolving environment, but really it's hard to notice things like that when these two are consistently giving us their best angles regardless of where we are in this space. And with the sheer quantity of additional elements of passing trains and parallax railway metalwork, it's kind of unfair to look too close at this stuff, because it's clear to say how elaborately placed everything is in this environment. The battlefield is wonderfully established for when we finally get up close and personal again, and it makes those sick impact frames even more satisfying to look at. Whether it's up close like this, or far away for another break in the action, this engagement is epic nonetheless from every angle. Just like Sung's layout from before, these more far-out shots still portray the sort of bravado Denji puts forth with nimble dodges and ferocious counterattacks, but also still show that he's continually being pushed back as well. Especially so right here, when he gets tossed so far down the train that when he gets back up, he loses the katana guy altogether before he reappears from above. It's crazy to think that this is where the real fight actually begins in the manga after they fall out of that building together. But even now, the anime still has extra things to show us. Even though we've started syncing back up with the manga again, the anime still sticks to its own rhythm by adding in little things here and there. Like how when Denji got sent up to the ceiling, the anime clarified that this only happened because he was staggered by the train breaking suddenly, or how the kick that follows sent him into the next cabin over this time, where he encounters the girl that has yet to escape for some reason. And Denji's interaction with this girl is a bit different this time, because in the manga, Denji wraps his right arm around her to protect her from the oncoming attack, but in the anime, she never got the chance to get up at all by the time she was splattered by the blood of Denji's now detached left arm. Unfortunate trauma for her, but at least she survived the most unfair attack the Katana Man has in his arsenal. Seriously, Denji couldn't have put it any better. That move really does need to be revised in the next patch. It does look pretty cool when we get to follow it though. These takeoff smear frames are so silky smooth as they get washed away, and I love the blowback that's shown as a result of this sudden speed change from both the 2D effects and the 3D ones. Something about watching the Katana Man's jacket flow in front of him as he throws on the brakes is just so cold to look at. And as far as he's concerned, this strike basically sealed the deal, but what he doesn't realize is that Denji has gotten pretty good at using his head these past couple days. And not just in the literal sense, because as we all know, the chainsaw on his head is just a bait for the real attack that'll come from the other end of his body. Of course, just like the manga, there was some smeary trickery going on with Denji's leg as to not reveal the outcome too soon, but I think what's most pleasing about this final exchange is the timing in which it was executed. Denji of course comes into the frame first because he's the slower one, and by the time the Katana Man smears his way into the picture, we've already been greeted with some impact frames to hide the exchange, while also providing a great opportunity for some slow-mo footage. That accompanied with some high contrast compositing before time starts to speed up again. It all happened so fast that not even the Katana Man had yet to realize that even though he cut Denji's head, he got a cut of his own that looks a little more serious. And actually, we can see the crease from that cut a little earlier in the manga. Something the anime doesn't show, but rest assured the final split is still just as gory as Fujimoto-san put it. For such a glorious Mortal Kombat finisher, it's such a shame that YouTube would rip me to shreds in the same way if I showed this, but I can at least show you the amazing final pose of Denji, one who has successfully mastered the conjuring of chainsaws on his legs. Now that's an impressionable way to finish out an amazing fight and finish out a chapter at the same time. This was an amazing fight, and probably the most ambitious one of the entire series. MAPPA surely faced countless challenges when doing this, but somehow they just managed to make it all work. Not just this fight, but the entire show as a whole. They built upon Fujimoto-san's idiosyncratic tone, and some might say they even did it better. I'm sure everyone on staff was thrilled that they managed to get this right despite all the challenges, but we're still not even at the finish line yet. No, we've still got some closing statements to cover after Denji graciously fuses Sideburns Man back together. This guy really is just a big old man baby, not a shred of dignity to be found. Although Denji isn't too much better. After all, he's got a pretty sick idea in his head for what he should do with this guy. An idea that Aki arrived just in time to hear the full thought process of. Now, initially, Aki wasn't too keen on partaking in the torture Denji put him through in episode 2, but over the course of this show, he's become much more accepting of Denji and his ways, even if they are a little perverse. These two have come a long way, and as weird as it is to say, it's quite wholesome that they can kick someone else's balls together. After all the hard work everyone put in today, it only feels right to go home and hit the sack, or maybe at least go out for ice cream first, but some people have their own unique ways of relaxing, much to the detriment of others. If there's one scene that could perfectly summarize Chainsaw Man as a show, I think it would be this scene right here. Denji and Aki having fun at the expense of their nemesis was the only logical conclusion for this arc, and while it might be hard to watch, I don't think any of us would have it any other way. Rest in peace, Katana Man, it wasn't good knowing ya. But what's a good conclusion to an arc if it isn't followed with some anticipation for the next ones? Because as it appears, this whole kerfuffle with the Mafia gave us just the right amount of gunflesh to start tracking the Gun Devil for real. What a great thing to leave us with. Cue the victory music. Music that was done by Eve. This song and ending was a great send-off for this series and gave us fans the sort of fanfare we deserve before more horrible things start to happen down the line. It's also one of those rare occasions where the events that happen in the ending are tied to the narrative of the show, and well, we already went into depth about it in the top 12 endings video, so instead of covering that again, let's skip all the way to the end of the trio's little escapade and start talking about what happens after the music stops, because the scene continues in anime exclusive territory to show Aki going outside to smoke Himeno's easy revenge cigarette. Nice to get one final piece of anime exclusive alone time with this guy. Also, it creates a nice transitioning point into the final scenario we get from the manga, where Denji is having that really obscure dream. Ironically enough, the last thing the anime adapts is the very first thing it showed us in episode 1. Funny how things come full circle like that, but really, I can't say anymore. The meaning of this door and Pochita's warnings not to open it is planted deeply in spoiler territory. What I can say though is that while this is indeed the last thing the anime adapts, we still haven't actually finished chapter 38 yet. No, we still have 3.5 pages left to cover, but since the anime itself doesn't cover it, then, well, this is where our coverage of Chainsaw Man comes to a close. There is a light teaser scene right afterwards for the next arc, but as of this date, MAPPA has yet to announce any plans for a season 2. And with everything else they're working on, it's hard not to be too surprised. After all, if a season 2 does come to fruition, it'll have to live up to the absolutely amazing adaptation season 1 was. Overall, this was a really fun series to cover, even if it took me forever to finally finish it. Because despite the fact that YouTube attacked about a quarter of the videos I put up on it, it was impossible not to cover, since it's clear that MAPPA threw the entire kitchen sink at this show. But all good things must come to an end. So I guess there's nothing left to do but thank each and every one of you for watching these little videos of mine. I may not be the most consistent YouTuber in the world, but I make it a point to read as many comments as I can from you guys, and it really drives me to make more stuff. So again, thank you. I really hope we can do this again in the future, with a series that will likely be MAPPA related, no doubt. Well, until that day comes, I hope every single one of you has a fantastic day. And once again, this is Registry, signing off. Take care, everyone.